Welcome to the Heart and Science of Creative Leadership. I'm Aarti Shah, and I'm joined by my co-host, Bill Coletti. And this is where we talk to agency owners about their methods, milestones, and mistakes in their creative leadership journey. On today's episode, we have Kathleen Gratehouse. Many of you may know her. She's had a long and storied career in tech PR, but she is best known for being at the helm of one of the fastest growing tech and digital agencies, Highwire, which she founded in 2008 with two partners, Emily Borders and Carol Carrata. Today, they are at $35 million with 150 people. So there's a lot to talk about with Kathleen. But before we do that, Bill, let's do our beats and experiments for the week.
Awesome. Well, my heartbeat is a heartbeat. And so I'm just back from Albuquerque, where my beautiful daughter and amazing son-in-law just had their daughter. We had 5 nights in the NICU, a little bit scary. Our little heart had a couple little challenges. And so, I got to have a conversation with a cardiologist friend of mine, and there's this amazing physiological reversal that happens post-birth with flows and oxygenation of blood. And the doctor, the neonatologist in the NICU said it's 3 things that'll make this little baby better and heal her heart. It's time, it's oxygen, and touch. And it absolutely happened. And she came home Monday. And so clearly my heartbeat is now my new heartbeat. So it's pretty exciting.
Oh my goodness. Oh, Bill, like that. So, I mean, like you've taken this to a literal level, and I love it.
Yeah. She's fabulous. And my more work-related, my experiment is around marketing, and it is around this notion that we've all thought content was king, and we need to create, and have content, push content out on various channels. And so the dichotomy in my experiment is that true, or can conversation get you there just as well? And so I don't know what my hypothesis is on the experiment, but my question to myself is, can conversation get the same ROI as content? In my coaching context, in small consulting context, can you get there with conversation to prove your thought leadership versus doing it on LinkedIn? That's my experiment.
Yeah, and so and by conversation, where would these conversations take place?
The podcast. I think we're talking to amazing people. I think it's one-on-one conversations. I'm talking to owners, kind of all day about stuff. Some are clients, some are not clients. And is that an engine for growth? Certainly an engine for my intellectual growth, because I learn so much in these conversations, versus me pontificating about something I may have an opinion on. But is that time better spent in a conversation?
There was this thing, right, that we used to do called word of mouth.
Wow.
And that used to be, right, the most powerful way to build a reputation.
Yeah.
And I think, somebody sends me a text and says, "Oh my gosh, Aarti, you have to try this." And there's someone that's part of my trusted circle. That is going to be much more effective than a link, than a 300-word
by the
LinkedIn
thought leader
post,
that
right?
said, you got to try this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Yep,
So
yep.
That's my experiment. I don't know how I'm going to manifest it, but it's on my mind.
Oh, I love that. So my beats, as you may notice a theme here, is that I think at my core, I consider myself a storyteller, and I'm drawn to all things storytelling. And so my beats is related to an observation I made about storytelling. I am very much a product of the Spotify generation. I curate playlists, I pick and choose the songs that I like. But we recently upgraded our sound system and we got a new record player. So I'm sort of revisiting some vinyls and listening to albums from start to finish. And I realized what's missing from Spotify, and our listeners can take this analogy and apply it elsewhere, is that storytelling arc, right? I mean, the whole tale that's told from the start to finish of an album. And there are also songs, right, on albums that if I hear outside of the context of the album, I'll think to myself, God, why did I ever like that song? But when I hear it in the context of the full album, it makes complete sense. It's a great transition, or it's an integral part of the story. And so that was sort of my beat this week, is just really going back to listening to albums, which I feel like I had moved away from.
I love it. So it's transformational for me. I'll show my age, but I think every episode I show my age is, U2's Joshua Tree. I think that is a well stitched together album that has a number of fabulous songs on it. But I think as a story, it really, really works well as an album. And that's one that I'll just go 1 through 12, and I'll just do the whole thing just because it makes sense.
I'm gonna make a plug for my Texas music people. Good Times by the recently departed Charlie Robison. Oh my gosh, that one from start to finish, just, I mean, it's fantastic. And then also Beautiful Day, which is his divorce album, which is also fantastic. And I'm not a huge Pat Green person, but I listened to 3 Days again recently, start to finish. Really enjoyable.
That's good stuff.
We don't make time for that, I gave some.
We're in this goldfish attention span world and all this TikTokification of whatnot, but taking the time to do stuff like that's high value.
And my experiment for the week is, we've been talking, with so many of our guests about AI and about, digital marketing and, monetizing folks on, digital platforms. And I remember something we said with Vijay, right? Is that people are rejecting the digital and they're seeking out human connection again. And that's also been a theme that's come up several times. Well, I saw a New York Times article that basically said feeling chronically disconnected from others basically can affect your brain structure and function, and even puts you at like greater risk for like neurological disease. So I think that we need to start thinking about connecting, like actual real human connection, conversation, as you had just said, the way that we think about eating our vegetables and, exercising. And, I understand a lot of folks listening are entrepreneurs. They might be working parents. They might be full-time PR practitioners. And it's easy for them to say on the weekends or at the end of the day that, my gosh, I'm exhausted. But it's sort of like exercise, right? You may begrudge it beforehand, but once you do it, a real connection with another human being, you will feel much better afterwards. And so that's been my experiment for the week, is just being mindful of that.
And is it changing behaviors for you? Are you doing something different this week?
So a little bit, in the sense that I was more likely to say yes to some invitations than I had been in the past. But I will say this is something that I'm cheating a little bit, because this is something that I had read about a while ago, even though the New York Times story there's a new one this week. So I've actually been intentional about this for a little longer. So
and we are all better for it. So thank you for doing that.
Well, now let's turn to our conversation with Kathleen. And, there's two things that I think folks should listen for. One is Kathleen talking about the capital investment that her firm took in 2022. And the other is listening to her perspective on diversity, or DEI, which she actually calls DIBS. I think it's diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Bill, is that what stood out to you as well?
Both of those. And I, we got into it where we talked about kind of the mental mindset and the process that they went through about seeking capital or being purchased. So some sort of economic transition. And it was interesting, one, just the methodology that they used, but I think, and the advisors, the investment bankers and whatnot, but also then how the three partners went through that process. So I think it's fascinating to think about that. And I think the DEI DIBS conversation, we asked some hard questions about, is it a nice to have or is it a must have? And I think you and I have some different perspectives on that are probably, quite honestly, probably more closely aligned than it may sound. But I think that agencies at a certain size have a little bit of luxury to make some decisions when you're smaller. You don't have those luxuries. But Kathleen, most importantly, please listen for this, makes the point that the later that you make those kind of commitments and decisions, the harder it is, much like diet and exercise, finding religion when you're 60 versus just living a healthy lifestyle since your 20s. And so I think that's kind of the point she's making.
All right, well, let's hear from Kathleen. Welcome to the show, Kathleen.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So, Kathleen, I've been thinking about the time that I spoke to you at a networking event in San Francisco in 2008. And I actually went back and checked my email to see when that was. You had just launched Borders and Gratehouse, which is what Highwire was called before Highwire. And you were with your business partner, Emily Borders. Take us back to that night. Like what was your headspace? Like, where was your headspace? Like, we were in this room full of agency people, corporate people. What did you think that you and Emily and then Carol had to, could add to what was kind of a saturated tech PR marketplace? And obviously there was something special because here we are, so many years later and you've built quite a firm. But what was your headspace at that moment?
That's interesting. I think that we had thought about doing something on our own for quite a long time. And so I think we were ready to go. And we had taken some twists and turns. We originally wanted to start the agency together. Carol, one of our other partners, ended up moving to Austin. She was kind of out of the market for a while. So Emily and I decided to just push forward and do it. And then Carol obviously came back into the picture after much coaching. And I'll tell you at another time about the time they both had maternity leave and left me on my own. But anyway, I often tell people when they ask about the start of the company, there's two things that immediately come to mind. First, everything that I was most worried about turned out to be not an issue. Like, will anyone ever hire us? Can we make money doing this? Can we build a successful company? And then things that we never considered ended up being really difficult. And I think that's when you start to figure out, oh, where's the IT person? You're the IT person. Or how do we set up the right financial framework for the business where we're really going to be able to scale? Because that was always our hope, that we would be able to get a lot bigger. Hiring, all the challenges with talent development. We were experienced managers, but it is very different when it's your own company and at different phases in the business, it requires different skills. So that was, I think, more surprising. The other notable aspect of 2008 was, sort of the economic meltdown and Great Recession. And I always laugh and tell people we were too small to fail because we were just getting started. But I do think, and it's always tough juggling the economic environment around you, but I do think it creates opportunity in every iteration. And in that case, I think it was a change driver. It was a driver of change in a lot of different kinds of companies. And frankly, there were a lot of startups that took that moment in time to leave their corporate jobs and do something different. So it was like the birth of the social media networks. It was a time when cloud computing was really getting going. So it was a really seminal inflection point, although people didn't know that at the time. So anyway, all's well that ends well.
And
right?
where were you guys before that? You were at another agency? You and Emily? Okay.
We were at a number of different agencies. So
Okay.
Carol, Emily, and I worked at a mid-sized firm. They were acquired years later by MSL. And then I went to Tex 100 because I wanted to do global. Tex 100 it doesn't exist anymore. It's part of Archetype. Carol went to Porter Valley. Emily stayed at that first firm that we worked together at, but then she took 6 months off and traveled around South America with her now husband.
Wonderful.
Good for her.
Wonderful.
She was the smart one, honestly, but...
So is there a, with you guys and the two or the three of you together, we've heard stories of sort of cocktail napkin stories where we were sitting at a conference and we sketched out what this amazing new firm would be. Is there a moment that you guys had that were kind of a cocktail napkin where you sketched it out and said, let's go do this? And how much time is there between that version of that conversation and go in 2008?
There were many cocktail napkin moments, many cab ride homes. There were cabs at the time. Thinking about what that opportunity could look like and were we ready to take that leap. So we did a lot of thinking about what we really wanted and what the right timing could be. And I think at least Emily and I were in a real inflection point in our careers, kind of trying to decide what we wanted to do next. And I was interviewing at the time and thinking, God, I hope I don't get this job. And I just felt like if I'm not excited about these really good jobs that I was lucky enough to be in the mix for, then it was time to really rethink my career. And I had done another career transition previously because I used to be a news producer. Aarti and I have talked about the days of being in news. And so I had made a change already once. And I do think you are constantly reinventing yourself in your career. And for me, I need to feel challenged, like I'm learning and that I have something big to accomplish. And that's usually when you get a little, at least when I
So
get
is
a
it
little
2
itchy.
years, 5 years, 10 years? How, I mean, is it just pre 2008?
I mean, honestly, I'm such a nerd. I was in junior achievement. And so I always thought I would have my own company. I just didn't know when it was going to happen.
I love it.
But probably serious conversations, maybe 6 months.
So let's go back to your partners, because one of the things that I think Highwire is known for in the business is that Kathleen, you, Emily, and Carol sort of all have your lanes of expertise, and that's, or at least that's the perception I think that we've always had in the market. Is that the case? And do each of you sort of own some element of the business? And does that mean, is everything done by consensus, or do you ultimately sort of make the decision sort of in your lane, so to speak?
It's interesting. I think we do have different areas that we manage for the business. And that's just survival. In the beginning, like Emily and I were like sitting next to each other in a very small office doing everything. Actually, that was kind of a shock because we had been managing teams and then we started our own company and we're like, all right.
Let's go find an AE for that. Where are the AEs? There's nobody here.
At Venture Beat broke my embargo. And I was like, oh my God, this is a flashback. But anyway, we naturally aligned around certain areas. And I personally, enjoy the business side. So that was like an area like planning for growth and really making sure the business fundamentals were there. That's just something that I really believe in. I think Emily is an incredible client counselor. So I think she aligned, and she's actually going to be our chief client officer. You heard it here first.
Breaking news.
But that's an area that she's incredibly passionate about. And Carol just loves deep tech. And she's also an incredible, I think, C-level consultant. And I don't know, it just kind of lined up that way. We each have business that we work on. We don't ever want to be one of those agencies where the leadership doesn't understand the modern era that we're in and how to really have impact with clients. So we've always maintained that, but we sort of have followed kind of the client opportunities that we think are best suited for each of us. And that really varies. I will tell you that because there's a lot of agency owners, I think, that listen to this, one of the eye-opening moments we had early on was when we were named as one of the 100 fastest growing women-owned businesses. And we were in the San Francisco Business Times. I think we were in the 90s. So I don't think this was like high watermark, but we were excited about it. We went to the reception for it. And during the reception, they asked, what was, the secret of your business, and went around. And some of these were incredibly successful businesses that were quite large. And it was just alarming to us at the time how many people said, when I got rid of my business partner, when I got the divorce from, it was very interesting. And we were sort of looking at each other because we felt like, we wanted to do this with partners. We really felt like that would be incredibly helpful in terms of really creating the kind of agency we wanted to see. But yeah, a lot of people have problems with their business partners. So be careful and really make sure that you choose well.
I mean, when you said that, Kathleen, I thought of 2 examples in our business of tech agencies where they really thrived once they decoupled, and it was a solo owner, and the solo owner will be open about the fact that that was their business partner was holding them back. So how do you ensure that you all are aligned on your vision for the agency and how you want to grow? Where are the new areas that you want to expand into? Where, and also when are you aligned on when you say, you know what, I don't want to be that agency. I don't want to be a mini person, or like, I mean, how do you have those conversations, especially because there's three of you, right? Not two.
I mean, I think we know each other really well, and that's incredibly helpful. And we've worked together for a really long time, but we don't agree on everything. One of our old bosses told us the way they made decisions at the very end was whoever feels the most strongly about it. And we have had to do that a few times. Like, if you're going to die on that hill, then you know what? This is a partnership, and we really have to respect each other that way. Um, we really always wanted to grow. We wanted to be like an agency that you could be proud to build your career in at, and then always feel like this is something on your resume that is additive, and you'll meet great people, work on challenging clients, but do great work. And that's kind of that through line. And I think I have a strong belief that if you aren't driving the business forward, it's gonna failure to thrive is gonna hit you pretty hard. And we all believe that, and I've seen that. Like, we've had ups and downs for sure, just like everyone else does. A business is like a living, breathing thing, but we've always really felt a lot of pride in what we do and a lot of alignment around the culture. And the culture side of it, I know like that's a very hard thing to describe, but it is so meaningful because it does really inform your day to day, your planning, who you hire, how you promote, like what you want to be and how you describe that and how you reinforce that has definitely been fundamental across our business as we built it. And I think it's very it changes because we've changed, but the core is there.
So can I link up? I want to go back to conflict, and I think that guidance that your mentor gave you of whoever's got the most strongly held belief kind of wins. And I think that's we should all learn that in our interpersonal relationships is just sort of to hold, honor, and trust the other person. We've been talking about culture, and you mentioned it, and we've talked about it a couple of times. We've got agency owners that have done a great job. They've got 7 really crystal clear core values. That's what they live by. We've got others that have sort of more of a looser articulation, and you know it when you feel it. Everybody acknowledges that culture matters and that culture is important. Link up for me how culture and conflict for you guys, the principal owners, the 3 of you, link up how culture and conflict helps you make better decisions. And how does culture matter? Is it just that the 3 of you know each other and we're just going to I'm talking about the tough calls.
Yeah, I mean, we had to define our culture together, right? Good. And we had to make decisions. And frankly, we had come up with values in our first iteration as Borders and Gratehouse, and we did a little exercise where we consciously looked at, we want to rebrand. What does our name need to signify? What do we care about together? So there were a lot of debates about that. I mean, it wasn't like one person said, oh, we have to have, fierce distinction, which is one of our core values.
Nice.
But, we had previously, it's important that people feel like they can build a career at Highwire, and it's not an agency that is going to burn you out and, one day you're up, one day you're out based on client retainers. It's more like we care about our team. We very carefully cultivate people's careers and help them succeed. We had a value around work-life balance, which is really important, but we're in a very competitive and tough industry, honestly. And we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and, they have a strong vision for what they want, and they demand a lot from their partners. And there was this kind of real back and forth with our team about like, what does it mean to have balance, which was one of our values, but also be a really strong agency partner and be there for your clients because they're not in a 9-to-5 situation. It's a global economy and people communicate every day, all day. So that was one where we really had to like do harder thinking about collectively what we mean by that and how that manifests in our business. And we actually changed it because we just felt like people thought, balance meant you leave at 4 o'clock, you have like, and it's not that we don't want people to have a life, we do, but we also have a real strong commitment to our clients and their organizations. And our business doesn't really work that way.
So, I mean, how prescriptive are you? Is it like the expectation is if a client sends an email, somebody needs to respond within 20 minutes? Is it that?
No, I mean, we do have best practices around like, it's not that you have to respond and have an answer. It's that a client needs to know you're there. Mm-hmm. So that's just an important thing. I sent you something. Is anyone out there?
Right. Like confirming receipt, right? Like even something as simple as like confirming receipt. We'll get back to you in the morning with some detailed thoughts.
I mean, we have a lot of working mothers. We have people with like all kinds of, they're caretakers in some cases, or, there's a million scenarios there. We don't have strict rules like you need to respond to something within 20 minutes, but I think we have client leads who often, make judgment calls about what's important and what's urgent and can't wait. And there's a big difference there. I think there's a trap that people will sometimes get into, and I really warn, especially with new clients, like you're teaching them how to work with you, right? And so if you're emailing them all weekend and answering messages at 2 a.m. and what have you taught them? Hey, they respond all weekend and want to talk to me at 2 a.m. So I think putting some parameters around that, one of the big things, we had a whole initiative to cut back the number of meetings that we have at the agency because it can be such a time intensive. And it's not how you communicate best. It's a communication vehicle, but part of that was pretty helpful, was using tools that we have for good, like sending something, but scheduling it. And we're also on Slack and like rules of engagement and what's good for a Slack and what isn't, and how to delegate effectively and have a conversation. Maybe because I'm older or seasoned, however you want to look at it, I still talk on the phone, which is really, really unusual for anyone in their first 10 years of their career. No phone calls. It's all like really almost at smoke signals before phone calls. But, we're in a communications business and there's nuance to what we do. So anyway, it's kind of a long answer, but how do we resolve conflict? We talk it out, and we have our values, which we've talked about together, and they really mean something to each of us. And then I think like we're persuadable. I think sometimes people get locked into a point of view, but I've never had that experience with my business partners, and I really like and trust them. So if I think they really feel strongly about something, I have to like take that seriously and be persuadable. And likewise.
Yeah. So just staying with partners, and because it's been a theme of ours, are you guys socially friends, and do the partners all know each other? And are you guys connected that way?
I just went to Emily's husband's birthday party in Utah. He turned 50. She did a whole line dance, Happy Beyonce birthday style, because he's from Texas.
Okay.
So we are friends. But we don't spend every weekend together.
Yeah, nice.
And
that's good.
We socialize, but we also have like different friend groups. So Carol and I, back in the day, had a ski share together. So we used to spend hours in the car driving up to Tahoe. And that was formative. But I would say we have personal connections. And I'll give you, the story this year, which I probably have not talked to you about, Aarti. I definitely haven't. But I had to have surgery, and I had to have major surgery in January. I'm fine now, but it was like open heart surgery. I was gone for 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, it was something that could be, I had a mitral valve repair through a robotic surgery. Amazing surgeon, actually. If you ever need this, Aarti, she's in LA at Cedars.
Thank you. Thank you for that tip.
A woman.
That's awesome.
But anyway, one of the great things about having partners that you can count on was I never had one bit of worry that they didn't have my back. And so when you like and trust people around you, and frankly, the overall team, I think we've got that kind of ethos where, you support each other, you back people up. And no matter how the business is doing, you have to have that, I think, in order to have a high functioning organization.
Do you think clients see the connection that's obvious that you're talking about, that the three of you have? Do clients see that, and does it matter that that is as strong as the way you're describing it?
I think it does matter. And I will tell you what I see when I go into clients. Again, culture is kind of a vague term, and it can mean a lot of things to different people, like we were talking about earlier. But you can walk into a company and you can immediately feel something about that organization, the way they talk to each other, the way a meeting is structured, how you're even brought into the company. I've been in long meetings, 7 hours with no drinks or lunch. I'm like, oh, this is an interesting, or people are one-upping each other in a meeting. So you can tell culture. I'm giving negatives, but you can also tell teams that really like each other. And I do think, we're about 150 people now, so I don't think our clients think, about the three of us necessarily anymore. They think about our senior leaders, but I think they can tell how we conduct ourselves and how we approach their business. I think they can. They tell us they can. So, and it's different, and there's different matches, right? You're not a good fit for everyone.
And Kathleen, I think you and I have talked about this. When I was covering the industry, and I talked to the client after they, awarded the business to an agency, and they would almost always say, "Oh, all of the top three, they all had great ideas. They all had great ideas, but it was really the chemistry, right? It was always the chemistry." And having watched this industry as long as I have, I could always tell when the partners were not necessarily aligned, and I was very rarely surprised when I would hear about spectacular divorces that would happen in our industry. And I mean divorce, I mean business partners. I don't mean marriages. Because I felt it years before the split actually happened. I could feel it. I could feel it, like you said, in the way the one-upping each other, sort of downplaying someone else's role and kind of upplaying someone, right? And so there was, so it is. I think so. If I could feel it, I think clients probably feel it. I think talent probably feels it. So I don't want to bury this, because I don't want, I want to make sure our listeners know that Highwire, you guys had a huge milestone in 2022. You secured your first outside sort of capital partnership with an investment from Shamrock Capital. Tell us a little bit about how this came to be.
Yes, what a long story, but
we'll break it up into bite-sized pieces.
We have been approached over the years to be acquired, and frankly, what had not been that interesting to us. We felt like we had a lot of growth out of us, and we were doing really well. But I think in, 2022, we had a pretty serious offer, which we explored. We ultimately decided not to do it, but it got us on that pathway. Where do we want to be? What is our own sort of exit strategy? Do we want to take capital out of the business? We've been doing this for quite a long time. And so we decided to kind of do some exploration. And we worked with someone who had played a CFO role, external CFO for us, and just did some testing. And we put together our SIM, which I'm sure you know is the description of the business and all of our financials and what makes us unique and special. And we did a little bit of outbound inquiry. His relationships were a lot of strategics. So we talked to a lot of strategic buyers. And along the way, we just decided we didn't want a strategic buyer. So we've gone through this whole thing, and why is that? So there's definitely a lot of private equity that has gotten into our industry. And the advantage to us of private equity is that they're not operators. So a strategic buyer certainly has the ability to operate your business and get really in the business. And we still wanted to grow and run the business. And so a strategic buyer in our situation could provide capital and resources that we didn't have. And that has been very additive as we were hitting certain inflection points where we needed to upgrade our systems. We, this last year, put in a new ERP system. We have new resource planning systems, which we're in the middle of right now. We're just doing a lot of things as we've gotten bigger and want to scale. And they've really helped us with that. But anyway, we decided to go with a strategic buyer because we felt like we still wanted to run the business in partnership with an investor, and that was the best option. And frankly, we also have the opportunity to grow the business, sell the business again, make sure that our team is really well taken care of so that next level of talent has equity in the business as well. And we just thought where we see the business going and our industry headed, that would be the best outcome for us. So we did that about 18 months ago.
Had you always run the business, even before you sort of the 2008 to 22, that big time horizon? Had you kind of run the business with that in the back of your mind? I mean, so systems were in place. We kind of you had tight books and things like that. Or was it kind of a bootstrap, kind of less than organized venture?
We're very organized
Awesome.
in our financials.
Nice. Great.
It's actually one of my biggest pet peeves is how so many communications firms don't run good businesses. And I think it is criminal.
Yes.
Which
is the reason I asked.
I feel very strongly about this. And I go to these big dinners, and I've had real debates actually with other agency leaders. And it's not that I don't think the work is obviously fundamental and clients are so important. But if you're not running a good business, you're not doing your team any favors. You're actually not doing your clients any favors because they need a solid partner they can count on. They need a company that can invest in professional development. They need a partner that is looking ahead and not just answering the brief that they have today. And, I think over servicing and not paying attention to the business fundamentals is a real issue, especially with independents. I think holding companies focus on the wrong things from a financial standpoint often, but I've always felt like we have the most freedom when we run a great business because then we can make really good choices and invest where we want to instead of just hopscotching around the business. So we actually very early on brought on an outsourced CFO. We ended up hiring on our finance function, very clean books all along because I also can't sleep at night if I feel like, we don't have really good fundamentals for the business. And so, I will say this, I always thought directionally, we have a strong business, we maintain great margin, we have invested quite a lot in our leadership team because you have to have, it can't be one person or three people, you have to have a team and a bench. And we also were steadily looking at our client base. A transformative initiative that we did was client segmentation, where we really looked at the best clients for Highwire, who we can grow with. That was incredibly important to us in terms of getting us where we are today, where we have a much greater percentage of our revenue from our top 10 clients. But anyway, yes, we ran the business always, with it in mind that this has to be a really strong business. And that always leaves you in a good position, I think, if you decide you want an exit.
So let's stay on that clarity of that, getting finances and systems in place. Is there, put your wisdom giving hat on and advisory to other owners, and let me role play a scenario. Kathleen, we're really only about $1.5 million firm. I've got it all pretty well figured out. I know our clients. We've got our systems. We do some quarterly bonuses. And I don't think client segmentation and hire and outsourcing the CFO, we're too small for that. And so that's not really good for us. We're not really ready for that. Do you agree, disagree, or would you have some different advice? I think I'm okay just sort of running it on my Excel sheet.
Well, I hear a lot from people where they say, oh, we know, like over servicing, which is a big issue in our business. We're like, now we know it. We know how much time we're spending on this.
Yes.
I'm like, I'm 100% sure you don't. I would say, and I'm a big fan of time tracking, even if that's not your billing, how you bill for your services. I just think that is, I've worked with Emily and Carol at an agency. Oh, we don't need timesheets. We know how much. And it was like so disruptive. And it led to so much staff turnover and then client turnover. It was like very unstructured and really bad. I would just say one of the best things we did early on, I remember the meeting, we do an annual planning meeting for the whole agency. But the whole agency was like 5 people in the beginning. Now it's 150, and we just did it about 3 weeks ago. But we bring the whole company together and look at what's our strategy, how are we going to get there, how do we as a team come together. We also do some learning and professional development. But anyway, one of the first one, I was looking for old photos actually, was Make Mine $1 million. And I think our first year revenue was like 750,000. But I think the reason we're getting up to 40 now is because we had a vision and we were planning for it. And, I think a vision is a lifestyle business, but you still have to have the plan in place. And, one thing you always know in our business, obviously you hope for really long-term client engagements, and you likely will have those if you do great work, but clients will also go away. They may be acquired. There may be leadership changes. And so if you are very focused and deliberate about who you partner with and saying no to things that aren't additive, which is hard to do, but essential, I think you turn into the vision that you have and need and want for the future. So even if you think you've got it all figured out, why not test your thesis and get some new thinking and into the business? And I think I'm also a big believer in asking for help, comparing notes, and being really transparent about your challenges, because people will help, but they won't help if you're not asking for it.
Yeah, say Aarti, a shout out for systems, just FYI.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, that's been a common theme here.
Wow.
So let's talk about transparency for a minute and what that looks like, right? I mean, transparency when you were an agency of 5 was probably really different than it is at 150. And I wonder now, because you had also mentioned that now that you have the Shamrock, capital, that you're looking at giving sort of equity to, other members of the team. So how do you manage equity now and how did that change from 5 to 150? And now that you have, potential, other equity partners coming in, you have an outside investor.
I think you all need to be aligned and understand what you're driving toward. And so that's been consistent, I think, no matter what the size of the business has been. When we were pre-Shamrock, we had phantom equity in the business. So we always felt like it was an important aspect to give opportunity to people who are growing the business with us. I mean, it's a long conversation about the right way to incent people because we went through different eras. We did profit sharing in the beginning because I'm like, I think profit sharing is the way to go because we share our success. And then I realized, like, at a certain point in your career, typically, under a manager, you're like late 20s, what you really were motivated by was your base salary. And so people were hiring people and paying them less, but seemingly more because they were only looking at the base. And we're like, but no, we do a base plus this bonus that you get, and most agencies will not pay a bonus to. And anyway, so I learned something about human behavior, and we completely revamped our compensation strategy based on that. We upped all our salary bands, and we started only giving bonuses to directors and above, which was the right thing to do at the time because it made us more competitive and a really insane talent grab.
I remember that time. Yes.
Yes. Today, like we're looking again at this, we have something called a long-term incentive plan, which I think is something to look at if you are an agency owner and you want to. I mean, it's basically builds on itself. So the people that stand the test of time and stay with the agency, their bonus goes up every year. So it was something we looked at, but we also have equity in the business, but that doesn't.
Does everybody get to do the long-term incentive plan, or is that just for at a certain level?
It's for senior managers,
okay. Yeah.
Senior management. It's director and above. Honestly, if I had it to do over again, now that we're bigger, we have so many people in it. I would do VPs above, to be perfectly honest, and figure something else out for the directors.
Yeah.
But anyway, we do also have equity, and it's very hard to explain how valuation is measured by the market and what the next exit is going to look like and how that's going to manifest from a financial standpoint. It's meaningful, though, and something that I personally need to take ownership of doing a better job explaining that and showing the various scenarios and how, when we build the firm, how that is reflected in how we're valued in the market. So that was in our last board meeting, and that's on my plate.
That's great. We've talked a couple times on these podcasts about kind of what we talk about, either basket or levers, depending on how you want to talk about it, around employee retention. How do we retain employees? And Aarti and I have had a number of really good conversations about it, is that the comp piece is a big piece and very well maybe the biggest piece. But there's work-life balance, there's experience, there's the type of clients, there's some long-term incentives. How do you think about that basket or pie or levers that you get to pull? What are the ones that really matter? My hypothesis is it's not just all about a money race on comp. There's more to it. The buyer, if you will, our talent, is more sophisticated than just, one big sticker price. Talk a little bit about that and how you guys think about that basket that creates a place that people want to stay for a long time.
Yeah. I don't think it's comp, although you have to offer competitive salaries. Yeah. I mean, that's just table stakes. But I think the two things that have been the most important for keeping people in the agency is, one, opportunity. So you feel like I have the ability to grow. I have the ability to learn. I like and trust the people around me. I will have the ability to get promoted, take on new challenges. So opportunity, I think, is a big one. And then the other is getting back to culture, like diversity, inclusion, and belonging as a core component of how we think about our business, how we see ourselves doing better work and being better colleagues to each other. That has been incredibly important because I think there's an expectation that it's different, honestly, than when I was starting out in my career, that, you bring your whole self to work and you tackle things like cultural identity and mental health and all the things that you are important to you as a person is in the workplace. And it's been like, that was one of the most, special moments in our kickoff, our annual kickoff, which is a really milestone moment for the company because we're all together. And it's like, especially with so many people working virtually, like a chance to meet face to face and really get to know people outside of your everyday life. But, all of our employee research groups came forward and talked about like their accomplishments throughout the year. And people talked about like specific challenges they had or ways that they have, put a hand out to others in the agency. And it was just like incredibly moving. And I think people stay for things like that because they want to feel like, I belong here.
And Kathleen, I have to say, a lot of agency owners talk this talk, and I can say that you all, from what I've seen on the outside looking in, it looks like you have walked the walk. I mean, I remember mental health, having conversations with your leadership team. It was actually, I think it was, I don't think you were there. I think it was Emily and Carol. I think we had lunch in Emeryville, and we were talking about mental health. And I think you guys brought in like Leslie Campisi in like 2018, 2019. I don't remember what year it was, to address burnout. We had some very meaningful conversations about diversity, even before 2020, but it definitely amplified after that. So I want to ask you, so let's stick with that for a minute. I mean, so you all, approach it, you can call it DIBS, right? Diversity, inclusion, and belonging. You all are known in the industry as having some of the most robust sort of initiatives around diversity. I think I just read your PR Week profile in the Agency Business Report, and one of your priorities was leading culture with DEI at the forefront. The winds of change around DEI, DIBS, it's changed since 2020. It has taken, as we've seen famously, investment has waned. It's been deprioritized by both clients and, professional service providers. What's your bird's eye view of the state of diversity now, and how does it fit into your overall business, and how have you maintained your commitment if clients aren't asking for it, and even if you're getting backlash potentially from employees on it? That was a lot.
No, I know. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would encourage any company that cares about their workforce staying with them, and retention and culture and, morale, honestly, to not abandon something that is so meaningful for so many employees. So listen, I will tell you that there is a lot of differing viewpoints on what's happening in the Middle East and Gaza at Highwire. And we have made a decision at the leadership level to not take a position as an agency and we've been criticized for that because we have talked about other things in the past.
Internally, your team is criticized, or someone noticed that externally?
Yeah, I mean, inside. People want us to do more.
Got it. Okay.
So I don't think we're going to be able to solve this problem. And I think we have diversity of views in the agency, and that's important for us to recognize. Anyway, we haven't backed off of that, and I think it's going to be a long-term advantage to our agency. If you just want to be like mercenary about it, better firms pay attention to what their workforce care about. And it was kind of, you mentioned the PR Week rankings that just came out. Like, we stood out because we kept our commitments and we continue to report out. And I hope that does change, because it is not a one and done thing. It is a living part of how you think about your talent, how you support talent. And I don't think it's gone away. I mean, let's face it, we're a diverse society. You cannot be able to be effective in any business if you have a monoculture. So I think it makes us better at what we do. And it's really important. It's not just like the numbers. It's really important about how you show up as a company and what you, how you choose to work. Now, do we have a lot of DIBS work for clients? It's more in the corporate comms thing. And I think there has been pullback, but there's been pullback in sustainability and ESG, because right now we're in a really tight market. And I think people are focusing on their core business. I don't think it's going to go away. And so I hope that we'll be having a different conversation next year.
Yeah. It's an interesting topic. I think we've got a lot of, smaller folks, smaller agencies. It's a nice to have, not a need to have, is kind of a general perspective. I think you're making the case for baking it in early and often and long term yields untold benefits. You don't even know what some of the benefits are. your resiliency in this moment in time, for example.
I have a question about this nice to have versus need to have, because, this is something we should talk about, because we talk so much about data, right? We talk about data-driven decision making. And Kathleen, I'm sure you and I have had this conversation, right? I mean, the data has shown that more diverse organizations, like, just objectively perform better, right? If you have more women in leadership, you by every business metric, you perform better. The more diversity you have across the organization, those companies perform better. So with that data, how does this become a nice to have versus a need to have?
Because, So it's a big, Kathleen, love your take on this. So I want to go back to 2008. And when I started my firm, different year, I wanted to do a lot of these things, but I needed to do some hires. I needed to find people that would go on this crazy entrepreneurial journey with me when we were under 1.5 million. And it was nice. And I tried to talk about all of these issues that were important to me personally. But given the choice between an A and a B, I needed the cheap A that could show up on Monday, because I had stuff that needed to get done. And we were just small and growing really fast. So Aarti, that's the context that I talk about it. It's not that it's in an abandonment and I'm just going to go hire another 30-year-old white guy just because that's who I am and what we should be. I'm not 30, but if that's who we should have. but it's nice to have, but I couldn't afford to do it at those early days. I needed to make some hard decisions.
Well, I think the longer you wait, the harder it gets. So,
amen.
I empathize, because I there's a million priorities. I would just say, like, keeping your eye on, like, your talent and understanding that's, like, your critical, like, that is your IP.
That's all that matters.
I know everyone thinks AI is going to take all our jobs. I don't think so. Not yet. But, I don't know. We didn't do it early on, and I regret that, because what I tell you is, by making that investment, it has really changed our business and our team, and it's created connection points that we didn't have before. Like, that whole idea of, like, what keeps you at a company? Well, it's, do you have a friend at work? Do you care about the people around you? Do they care about you? Does your manager look out for you in your career? Can you be your authentic self? I know, like, I'm a very pragmatic person, in case you can't tell. And, but I will just say, like, you'd be pretty, it's a pretty interesting transformation that happens across the organization when you start paying attention to that. Maybe your first step is to pay attention. And I also think it's not easier to hire a 30-year-old man.
Yeah.
Unless that's your entire network. Like, our intern programs are, like, foundational to our agency. And that's always been actually investing in talent and paying our interns and putting them through a really rigorous program and spending a lot of time on, like, what that looks like. We've done that, but then, like, we really looked at diversity first and thinking about, like, we can take the usual suspects from Cal and NYU, but we started looking at other places. And then they have friends, which, as you know,
and it feeds on itself. Absolutely, it makes those referral choices.
It does.
Yeah, and so
we're not perfect. I don't want to come across like we've solved every problem. I think our leadership team needs more diversity, and that's.
Right.
Guess who has all the experience because of the years that they've been in our industry. So,
yeah. And it's just, and I just to Kathleen, I want to get your point on this. Go back to those little days, those 2008, 9, those early days. You needed some sort of software to make sure everybody got paid every other Friday. You needed a thing to make a thing happen. And that's why I think, and that's how I think about this in those early days. I want to think about it. I want to do it. I need to get everybody paid every other Friday, or health insurance, or whatever the context is. As you expand and you mature and you spread your wings and you become a real firm, and 5 becomes 15, becomes 20, becomes 150. That's on that long journey, but it has to begin. You can't begin at 0. I think that's what you're advocating, Kathleen. But it doesn't need to be everything. because you need a software system and you need health insurance. And so that's sort of the way I think about it in that, what sounds harsh, need to have versus nice to have. I'm talking day 1 to day 500, that kind of stuff.
Well, you need employees.
You need people.
And the best employee workforces are diverse. So
Absolutely.
It's not an either or.
Yeah. No, I
one of another entrepreneurial conundrum.
I mean, if you want to tell good stories, I mean, look at some of the most influential storytellers of this moment, right? If you cannot tell a story that's going to resonate with, a bigger audience, I really think it's an investment in the business. And so sort of let's kind of stay with culture here, because I do want to get your take on burnout. We talked about this a little bit, but it's especially common in our, industry, especially as agencies are looking to grow, right? That's where we start seeing a lot of churn with talent. How have you been? Is there anything you've done that's been sort of institutional or systemic to deal with burnout? That's not just like, oh, you can take a duvet day, or we'll do 4 p.m., release on Fridays, but
what
really
kind of day? Duvet?
A duvet day. I've heard of some agencies, they'll have like 1 or 2 floating duvet days.
Branding. It's basically
stay in bed.
A personal day. It's a personal day, basically. It's a personal day. But these always felt like Band-Aids, and you'll tell someone, oh, take a 3-day weekend, but if they're coming back to 12-day work days on that's not going to really solve the problem. You're going to lose that employee eventually, right? So is there anything that you've done organizationally to sort of at least try to manage this for people more consistently?
I mean, I know this is not going to be the sexy answer, but we really pay attention to capacity and utilization because it's the first wave of that's where you start to see.
Because people are burning too hot, you mean? They're burning too hot?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that you can uncover with that. One of the biggest causes of burnout is a failure to delegate effectively. Is that related? Oh, you're just pushing work down. No, we are a team business. And if you can't delegate, that inflection point when you become a manager and you're used to being the producer of all the work, that is a big change. And so I remember, I don't know if you know the David Meister, who's the guru of professional services.
Trusted advisor.
I give out that book.
Wonderful.
It's very dated, but incredible information. But one of my bosses printed out the whole chapter. I'm sure it was copyrighted.
And photocopied.
That's right. But it's delegating, right? And that's something that's maybe not an obvious solution, but it is a solution. And I think good systems, we're right now looking at are there new tools? We've always invested in good software products that we think are additive. There's a lot of time intensive work that we do that we're hoping is going to be streamlined. To me, when I think about my own career, and I've always been, I enjoy working, and I consider myself a hard worker, but there's definitely been times when I've hit a wall. I think it's finding new opportunity and challenging myself and stop getting out of the rut. So I talk to people about, well, what are you doing that gives you energy, and what are you looking forward to for the week? One of the questions in our employee engagement survey is about how much fun you're having at work, but you're it's actually really important.
Yeah.
Are you having any fun doing this, or is it all work and no play? So I wish I could tell you there's some secret that we've uncovered, but manage the business appropriately, look for ways to help people make positive change. I think we've never been an agency where I can tell you right now, people do not stay late hours, but that's not where the burnout comes from. It's not, to me anyway. I think the burnout comes from the intensity of the work, which in client service, there's always that we could be working 24/7 for any one of our clients. So anyway, I would just say supporting people in the right way, giving them the tools to take control of their work life, providing outlets where you can learn, which gives me energy, or have fun. and connection.
So Kathleen,
We
you
do
and I,
sabbaticals.
sabbaticals have come back. No,
Yeah.
sabbaticals have definitely come back. I remember when they went away, and they've absolutely come back. So you and I had a conversation at the beginning of 2020 when the whole world went remote, and I remember you said that Highwire was not a remote company, if I remember this correctly. And now you're in your beautiful shiny new offices in New York. Obviously, when it comes to burnout, I think being remote has helped, especially parents, feel like they can manage a workload. And I'm gonna say parents, not moms, because I'm trying to normalize dads being equal partners. How have you, and so where have you landed on sort of accommodating that sort of flexibility that people need, especially when they're in certain life phases, and sort of maintaining like an in-person work environment?
I don't know how many states we're in, but I think it's at least 15 based on the tax returns I see. So we've hired talent all over the country, and many people are 100% remote. We have asked for people to come in 2 days a week if you're affiliated with an office. So San Francisco, Boston, and Chicago, New York. It's very, it's not tightly policed. And so I would just say the return to work hasn't really happened for most agencies. I was really interested to kind of see what people were reporting back on that. We want to do the right thing. I will tell you, lots of people want an office, but then they don't want to go to the office. So it's sort of an expensive, nice to have if we're not going to use it. So we're trying to have reasons for people to come. I know that's kind of a tired trope at this point because people have been saying it for so long, but I do know when we come together as teams in person, there's an energy there that is really important. But I also certainly don't want to make life harder for working moms and dads. So I don't know what the answer is. I do know that our decision to keep our offices, I think, is something we stand behind. But we may not need the same office infrastructure that we had pre-pandemic.
Yeah. And have you found that it's been a competitive advantage to have to be a bit looser about your return to office?
I don't know.
Policies. Okay.
Listen, Aarti, there's nothing that gives you more competitive advantage in hiring than a slowdown in your industry. So our hiring right now is I could hire 5 really strong people.
Yep.
And I want to, but I have to do it at the pace of the business. So we have access to talent that we didn't have 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Or maybe our opportunity is different. And so that's opened up other things for people. I know people there's a strong hardcore contingent of people that want an office. And then there's a strong contingent of people that value flexibility first. And I hope that we can be a home for both of those types of people. But if you're a manager, you've got to find time to work with to get to know and help your team. And one of our best managers has been remote forever. She moved to Seattle and met her husband, and we don't have a Seattle office. She's one of our best managers. So I know it's not a location thing, but anyway, I don't have any words of wisdom. I'll have to listen to your podcast.
It's a tough one.
Other guests tell you.
It's all over the place. Everybody's begrudging or kind of whatever. We just need to get the work done. And so it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
I think.
People claim it's an advantage. I don't think it is. I think it's harder to manage well, but people will tell you that.
Keeping a flexible mind and, the world has changed, right? There's some amount of trying to put toothpaste back into the tube that just feels like sort of, a last gasp of an extinction gasp or something. And I'm not saying it. I don't think that the office is dead, but I do think there has been a fundamental change in the workforce and the relationship to work, right? For many people, they saw their first recession, right? Or I guess whatever we're calling this, slow down, the headwinds.
This ain't no recession.
Yes, there's no recession. There was never, the numbers never aligned. But, I mean, people, Kathleen, you know this out here, right? People's entire identities were the tech companies they worked for a while.
Yeah.
And then they watched, jobs just get cut, like kind of without, mercilessly in some cases. And I think people's relationship to their jobs has changed. And I think people are going to prioritize themselves a little bit more. And I think that is going to make it harder for entrepreneurs to some degree, or anyone who's looking to hire talent.
Let me ask you this, Aarti. Remember the old days when you were just getting started and you had someone you could just ask a question to, or you could run into, and you had that ability to really collaborate on the fly? How do you replace that?
So
that was essential for me.
And it's not Slack. You don't do it on Slack.
No, it is. It is Slack. It is Slack. I'm going to push back on this. No, you guys, I learned our entire business. So I was remote. So I was hired by PR Week.
The science person in our distracted society, and how that's like.
I was hired at PR Week as a remote person. I worked Keith is a complete Keith O'Brien, who I'm still dear friends with. He is a complete tech nerd. So he was like, let's get on Google Chat. Let's get on I was connected in every which way to Keith. And I learned the business. I was sending Keith IMs and I was like, what the heck is going on with this agency? And Keith would be like, oh God, let me tell you about them. And we Keith, and we built a relationship. I had a 2-hour conversation with Keith last week. He and I are still very close, and we probably saw each other in person once or twice a year, but we used technology effectively. I mean, people are meeting their spouses online these days. And when I will say, when I worked at an agency,
well, I was just reading an article that speed dating is back because people don't want to meet online anymore.
They want their meet cutes, right? And there is, and I'm not knocking that, but I will say when I worked at an agency, I did do 2 years in office, and my third year I was remote. And it was beneficial. It was, and I will admit, being in that office those first 2 years and overhearing conversations. I will say there were even meetings that I was involved in that I didn't really have a speaking role, but I heard the way that certain situations were navigated. But I do think, you can do that now. Look at our conversation now, right? And body language and all of that. We can at least get some sort of semblance. I am a believer in embracing technology. And yes, in person is important, but I don't think it needs to be every day.
But we can still reminisce about the past.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, we're doing it. That's how it's
we're doing it. That's why I'm saying people are
we use every tech tool you can think of.
Yeah.
It's not always to our benefit.
We need to wrap up, so I'll just do this sort of this provocative drop is that professional work environments involved an office. And we went to an office. And when I was an undergrad, I aspired to be in an office, in some big city. I hope people maintain good grammar, and that doesn't just go away as well as a part of the professional work experience. Is it just easier and efficient to message and chat as opposed to write, with verbs, modifiers, and nouns? So I say that as a cranky older person, as I don't want it to go away completely.
Yes, I think
I hope it doesn't go away too, like the office.
Using the right channel, for the right task.
Thing.
Yes, that is the art. If it's a quick question, Slack can be great.
And the way that you talk, the way that you communicate on IM, there is a kind of etiquette on how you would communicate on IM versus an email versus a written, maybe a more formalized email or something. And I think part of being a good communicator today is knowing that difference, right?
Yes.
What's if you Slack somebody in a really formal, and it sounds like an email, no one's going to want to communicate with you on Slack. They're going to say, all right, cool, thanks. So, I think that versatility is kind of what's beautiful about our world right now, right? I follow New York Times columnists on TikTok. They sound totally different than they do in their column, right? Jamel Bowie. Like he's like, I hope that I got his name right. Kathleen, you would know. Did I get his name right?
I think that's right.
Okay. Like sometimes he's on his bike rides and he's like sweating and like talking about politics. It's very, and it doesn't mean he's not a beautiful writer, when I read his column, but it's a different format. And I think tomorrow's communicators will understand how to adapt to different platforms in media.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
And what a fun, engaging conversation. I really appreciate it.
And congratulations for having just a great firm. It's really wonderful to get to know you a little bit better. You guys you're tackling some big things and both financially as well as culturally. So congratulations and keep it up. It's awesome.
Yes.
Well,
and Kathleen, you know that I think that all of your success is so well deserved. I think you all have just run. When you were talking about financials, I just thought that you were one of the agencies that from the get-go, I knew you guys just ran. You remind me of Susan Butenoff. Like you run that kind of agency where margins matter and the financial hygiene was prioritized from day one. So kudos to you.
Well, I think it's given us a lot of freedom, which has enabled us to have more, I think, control over what our business looks like. So anyway, the great thing about our business is our work is never done. So
yes.
Well, AI will not get us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right.
Congratulations.
All right.
Thank you,
Cheers.
Kathleen.
Thank you.
What a great conversation with Kathleen. And I think, Bill, she runs the largest agency that we.
And she's the largest one we've ever spoken to date. And thank you for bringing her on. I mean, what a great asset and great perspective she has.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Two things that really stood out to me are, kind of what she opened the conversation with. And that was that everything before, when they were in the cocktail napkin phase, as you like to call it, everything she was worried about in that stage ended up really not being an issue. And that seemed like it was primarily like, will anybody hire us? Will we have any clients? And then the things that she never even considered were where she found her greatest difficulties. And that was, around IT, hiring, training and development. And so, Bill, I was curious if that resonated with your entrepreneurial journey as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was worried, started with one client and have now learned a question, where's your second check going to come from? And I had no earthly idea where the second check was going to come from. But it came, as did the third and the fourth and the fifth. But I had no idea. I didn't have a name on my company. So I wasn't worried about, needed to be worried about bigger things. There was no name. We didn't really have a bank account. We hadn't subscribed to Quicken yet. And so I was worrying about obviously making revenue. It came and it was really quite nice. And by the fortunate, blessings of a reputation and some really thoughtful people to send me referrals. But yeah, I worried about the wrong things. And I should have been worried about some systems, some back office. I should have been worried about where's my third, fourth, and fifth person going to come from, not just my third, fourth, and fifth check, but where are the people going to come from? And those were things I didn't really think about at the front end. I thought it was all about sort of positioning, being unique, being interesting, and similar to what we talked about on the front end, positioning the content so it's perfect. The reality was it was great conversations and referrals that got me where I needed to be. And that's probably an experience you've had as well, that we're worrying about the wrong things.
When I first started my journey, it was the same question. I was like, well, who's gonna want to work with me? And that ended up not being the problem. In fact, in the beginning, I thought it was all about positioning and name. And I remember I actually spoke to an agency founder who I'm glad I actually didn't listen to. And he told me that, Aarti, you need to pick out a name and you need a deck with all of your, all your positioning. And I actually spent some time on that, and I've never ever used that because a lot of it was, as Bill and you have talked about, is my systems and processes and making sure that those were in place, not sort of, my blurb.
Yeah, but while you might not
have
used the deck, so maybe going back on myself, you might not have used the deck, but was the thought process of creating it valuable to refine your positioning that came through in conversations and the way you did business? So was the process valuable even though the output wasn't taken to market?
Yes, I think that process was valuable, but honestly, in the beginning, I didn't know truly, and maybe some entrepreneurs listening did No, and like Bill, for instance, like you had such a deep experience with crises, right? And so you knew what your lane was going to be. When I first started, I was sort of considered to be a jack of all trades, and because I had visibility and insight into all aspects of our business, so I was getting pulled into a lot of different things. And I actually had another CEO tell me early on, and he's like, Aarti, he's like, you're not going to enjoy doing all of this. He's like, at some point, you're going to have to figure out what it is you like and where you want to specialize. And that was actually really valuable. And because of that, I was very mindful of every time I got pulled into a new project. I thought, is this really what I want to do? So it's a valuable process.
Great mentor of mine said, use the phrase riches in the niches.
Yes.
It's quite a trope out there, and I think, Kathleen has got really good really fast. And that other part of just the way she runs such a tight ship. It's so impressive, the way they've run it. And I think, while I don't know if clients necessarily see it, but it certainly emotes itself in their competence and their capabilities, but having such a sort of a tight operation.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's always stood out with Highwire is how well and disciplined their business has been run. And that's very clear in the way they talk about it, the way they talk about their goals. And, and I think that's evident in, the fact that they were able to secure outside investment.
Yeah. I remember back in the early days, back at the public strategies days, is we would often, we didn't do a really good job of articulating who we are. And we just sort of figured it out, kind of a chameleon kind of thing. And I feel that might have been a missed opportunity. I mean, clearly we were successful in the early days. But I thought it would have been really valuable. It was until the very, very end that we run campaigns for corporations. Until that kind of got clear, we didn't really make that pivot. So I think those guys being clear at it, but also just having a sharp pencil for the checkbook is really very valuable.
One of the things that I've observed in the agencies that we've seen is those who have had a CFO, and you can get fractional CFOs these days, right? Like you don't, it's not, it doesn't have to. Yeah. I mean, those agencies have always been better suited for success than the ones that either had.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen family members, right, that have been put in charge of managing the books, and sometimes they have the right credentials to do that. Sometimes they don't. I've seen family members have inflated titles, and they're drawing salaries from those, and those are the agencies that honestly they typically don't have a great succession plan. They don't typically have a great exit because they're running this very much like. I'm trying to think of something that's not going to offend someone that's listening to this, but they're not running it like a business, right?
Yeah. And good businesses surround themselves with great advisors, whether that be legal, HR, CFO, whatever. The question is, how early is too soon and how small is too small? And the first person I talked to was a former CFO of a firm I was at. She went out on her own as I was going out on my own. The first person I talked to, and she guided me through all the basics. And it was the best thing I did. Legal, I wrote a basic contract, hired somebody for that. But having good advisors. But the question is, when and can it ever be too soon?
Well, I mean, and I wonder sometimes when some of these agency founders are giving, for instance, phantom equity, how much visibility does that bench get into the operations and into the financials? And I asked that because I remember one of the things that Jeff Hunt said is that he doesn't want to be too transparent about the business because he wants his people to focus on the work, right? But if you work for Jeff's agency and you want to open up your own agency one day, if you're focused on where are you going to learn how to run a business unless you have a P&L one day, which, and I think that's a real upside of having, managing a P&L is being able to learn some of that. But otherwise, I mean, that's a skill that you want to develop as well, right?
Yeah. And you got to learn it somewhere. There's plenty of bad habits out there that you can learn. And sort of that hustle is going to win the day on everything. And I think hustle is critical. Hustle is really important. But if you don't have money in the bank and some sort of system to pay your taxes and do your payroll, No amount of hustle is going to fix that. So I think getting advisors is really critical.
And one more thing that I'm thinking about another conversation is like, an advisor versus bringing somebody on necessarily as an equity partner. Because I think it was a conversation we had with someone where, we asked, we're like, when you look for a partner, is it, one of you is going to be sort of front of the house, the other is going to be, back of the house. And I think they said, no, if you're going to be my partner, I need you to be bringing in business. Like I can hire someone to run the books. I need you to be running the business with me, to bringing in business, serving clients.
Yeah.
Growing the business.
And you've mentioned it in the past. It's great. There are fractional resources there. I get solicited. You put on LinkedIn that you're an owner operator, and you get solicited all the time for tax advisors, insurance advisors, you name it. There's lots of resources out there. So, and they can be cheap, and you can ask them a simple question. And I actually used, back in the early days, I used Quora. I typed a question as a small business owner, should I blah, 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 blah. And it was valuable. It was useful. You got to be able to ask. This is a team sport.
Crowdsourcing information. No, I mean, that's one of the upsides of the digital world that we live in, is we can crowdsource information like never before.
Absolutely. Great conversation with Kathleen. Thanks for bringing her to us.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
Thank you for joining Aarti and I on the heart and science of creative leadership. Before we go, quick shout out to our production team, Brian Douglas and Brenna Yeary. Join us next time as we continue our conversations with owners of creative agencies, where we discuss their methods, milestones, and mistakes.